Canon has released some amazing cameras this year. The 1DX Mark III, C300 Mark III, and the EOS R5 and R6 have all been fantastic in their own way. However, this new camera seems to break the mold with Canon and give people a new entry point into the cinema EOS family. Today, we are looking at the Canon EOS C70. First things first, the C70 we have here is a pre-production unit, and things could change between now and when the camera starts shipping. This camera does look rather odd. It's kind of like if you took a C300 Mark III and a 1DC and smashed them together. Canon are aiming this camera at a large range of productions such as documentary, corporate, news, interviews, and social media and events. The C70 costs £3,999 excluding VAT, which positions it just under the price of a C200. However, it holds a few advantages over the C200, such as the new and improved fantastic DGO sensor from the C300 Mark III, and the ability to shoot 4K 120 frames per second without a crop and with full dual pixel autofocus. The main reason to pick up a C200 would be if you want to shoot mainly in cinema raw light, and if you enjoy the form factor slightly more, but that's about it. The C300 Mark III is a good bit more expensive than the C70. However, it does feature the same excellent sensor, but with the added ability to shoot cinema raw light, a better selection of I/O, and a much larger and arguably more professional form factor with increased modularity. Anyway, let's look at what the C70 can do. As we normally do, we wanted to put the C70 into a creative environment that we can see people who are going to be buying the camera will put it into. For this, we chose something a little bit more corporate. So we shot a short documentary piece about our lens engineering department. This consisted of an interview and a range of shots documenting Angelo here doing his thing.
What we do here is a bit complicated. I'm Angelo, I'm a lens engineer at CVP. I repair lenses, cine lenses, broadcast lenses. Lens engineering is not just engineering. We don't just touch boards and cables, we enter inside lenses, which are terribly delicate. A lens is something which has an optical alignment, it's something that has almost a soul. You need to understand how it works, you need to understand the need of the single lens and try to bring it back to the life, the real soul of the lens as it was when it came out from the factory of the manufacturer. I must say that the most important skill in lens engineering, which is the one that I learned from Gary, is the precision.
If you want to watch the full video, hit the link here. We shot with a mix of the 50mm 1.2 RF, 24-70 2.8 RF, as well as a Metabones RF to EF speed booster with our Milvus 100 f2.8 macro. We shot in a mix of XF-AVC DCI 4K 25p all-I, as well as XF-AVC 100p long-op. Overall, the camera handles really well, though coming from more traditional cinema EOS cameras, the form factor does feel a little weird, but we did get used to it. However, the camera is aimed to be an entry level into the cinema EOS line, and I think it does a good job at that. The menu is easy to navigate, and you have so many buttons that you can customize to make adjustments fast while shooting. With the interview, we shot using the Sennheiser MKIII going into the camera, and it sounds really good. One thing we didn't like was we kept hitting the magnification button on the back of the camera by accident, so we quickly unbound it and changed it to one of the front buttons under the mount. The fully articulating screen was really handy to put into a range of different positions and still be able to see the LCD easily. That paired with the smaller form factor of the camera does make it easier to put into these unique positions and angles. The image seems to look every bit as good as the C300 Mark III, and considering we shot mainly in XF-AVC DCI 4K 25p all-I, that's unsurprising. But we'll get more into the image in a little bit. Let's take a look at the physical design of the camera. The physical design of the camera is pretty unique. It's like Canon took elements from the 1D line, the C series line, and also a little from the XC line. It's surprisingly small when you think about what's inside, especially when compared to the C300 Mark III. It weighs roughly 1,190 grams with the strap and focus hook attached, and 1,620 grams with a BPA-30, 2 SD cards, the top handle, the microphone holder, strap and focus hook all attached onto the camera. It's around the same width as the 1DX Mark III, but is a decent amount shorter and quite a bit thicker. This means that when it comes to getting the camera on a gimbal, it is easily done, so you'll be able to use it with gimbals like the DJI Ronin S. The nice thing about the flippy screen at the back as well also means that you'll be able to flip it out and use it no matter the angle you are shooting at with the gimbal. On the front of the camera, you have a few things of note. First of which is the lens mount. The C70 is the first Cinema EOS camera to feature Canon's RF mount. It's great to see RF mount on a C-series camera as it is an incredibly versatile mount, and Canon are focusing on creating new and exciting lenses for it. RF mount has a shorter flange distance of 20mm when compared to the more traditional mounts like the 44 flange of EF and 52 of PL. This means that manufacturers do not need to incorporate additional elements to bend light to travel a greater distance from the exit pupil of the lens. With less corrective elements comes less aberrations and the ability to design smaller and faster lenses with the same or better quality. This shorter flange also gives you the ability to mount a huge range of glass onto it, and there are only a handful of lenses and mounts you can't adapt to it. This means that you can use any of the great native RF lenses as well as a range of adapters to get a huge range of popular lenses onto the camera. Not only do Canon make a range of RF adapters, but companies such as Metabones, Photodiox, Vocas, Wooden Camera and KipperTie make a massive range of adapters so you can get whatever lens you want onto the C70. You can even use the RF extenders that Canon released earlier this year. Some of the standout adapters are the PL mount from KipperTie or Metabones and the Metabones Ultra Speed Booster. Though with the C70, Canon have also announced another EF to RF adapter. This new adapter has been designed for the C70 and features a 0.71 focal reducer built into the adapter. This will allow you to use any full frame EF lens you have and achieve the full frame look on this Super 35 sensor. We haven't had a chance to use it yet, but it looks like it will be a very popular choice with people who pick this camera up. The mount also features two little brackets that attach the camera body here, so the mount has a more secure connection to the camera's mount. This new adapter has been designed to only work with the C70, so will not work with the EOS R series of cameras. One downside of this adapter is the coverage of the dual pixel autofocus system is reduced from 80% to 60%. This isn't the case when you are using the regular RF to EF adapters, only with the focal reducer mount. This new adapter will be retailing at £439 excluding VAT, which is only a little bit more expensive than the Metabones option. This is a cheeky little pickup piece as Canon have actually sent us their focal reducer after we'd already recorded this piece to camera, so if it sounds a little different, that's why. We only had the camera and reducer for a day, so we did a couple of quick tests against the Metabones RF to EF Speed Booster. But before we get into those, I have a few thoughts about the build and design. The adapters feel very well put together and everything feels really solid. One nice touch is that the brackets that you can attach to secure it to the body feature captive screws so you aren't going to have them fall out as you are removing them from the body. Nice touch, Canon. For our first test, we shot a chart to see how both the reducers render detail. We grabbed a Canon 24-70 f2.8 Mark II EF, the Canon focal reducer, a Metabones 0.71 speed booster, and a regular RF to EF Canon adapter. The focal reducers are very similar in performance across the frame, however I would say that the Canon resolves better detail towards the corners of the frame with less CA. When comparing the performance to the native mount, it's actually not a whole lot worse, so I wouldn't worry about the adapter reducing the resolving power of your lenses. For the second test, we wanted to see how the adapters handled the light being blasted directly down the lens, and see how the flare behaves as you pan the light through the frame. The Canon does a better job again at controlling the flare and not introducing much internal reflection. The Metabones introduces some flare and a bit more veiling glare. Overall, they are both good, but the Canon edges out the Metabones slightly. This new adapter from Canon performs really well, and if they can update the adapter to work with more lenses flawlessly, this is an easy recommendation for people wanting to achieve that full frame look on this camera. If only the C200 Mark III had an RF mount. As well as the mount, you have two microphones for the internal stereo microphone, two custom function buttons that you can rebind, and mounting points for the new focal reducer adapter around the mount. And finally, a nice large tally light in the top right, which you can toggle on and off in the menu. On the top, you have a very nice physical power on and lock switch, similar to the ones from other C-series cameras. With this, you can lock the camera. This will disable any input apart from the record button as default, but you can change this in the menu. This will be great if you've set up a shot and don't want anybody to fiddle with your settings. It's got a really satisfying click to it too. You have a couple of hooks to mount a strap to. You also have a cold shoe mount that you can mount the included handle to. This is great to have the flexibility to go between having no top handle and a compact form factor to then having a top handle with a mount for a shotgun microphone for when you require something a bit more built out. There is also a focus measurement hook, a media button which is used to play back clips, a SD card slot select button with indicators for what slot you are using, a dial for exposure control, as well as a nice large red record button. There is also a custom function button placed just to the right of the record button, which allows you to activate one-shot AF as default if you don't want to shoot continuous autofocus. On the bottom, you have one of 2 exhaust vents and a range of mounting points. These mounting points are probably in the weirdest positions I've ever seen on a camera. Most tripod plates require the mounting points to be above and below each other, not left and right of each other. There is a locating pin hole here, but not every tripod plate has a locating pin. Take this Sakura Touch and Go plate for example, or this Manfrotto 500 series plate. If you want to use it with this, you can only use one screw, as otherwise you're going to be mounting your camera sideways. The way around this is to pick up a cage for this when it becomes available, but I really don't understand Canon's design here, and out of the box you have a professional camera that you can't securely mount onto professional tripods. The only instance I could see this being handy is when mounting the camera onto a gimbal. The left of the camera has a lot going on. You have a range of buttons which you can rebind, as well as the control for the built-in ND filters, which we'll test later. You also have a massive range of I/O. You have 2 3-pin mini XLR ports, a 3.5mm microphone input, a 3.5mm headphone output, a USB-C port which can be used with third-party wired or wireless adapters to connect to an Ethernet or Wi-Fi connection or a GPS unit. This enables video data transfer via IP, streaming or FTP. We didn't have a chance to fully test this, so if you want us to have a look at it in future, let us know. You then have a remote port, and lastly a full-size HDMI out capable of outputting 4K 60 42 10-bit. It's a shame that the camera doesn't have an SDI output, as I feel like this is the only thing that's really missing here, and considering the market that it's aimed at, I feel like this should have been a priority over a HDMI port, but I can understand that this is probably to cut costs. On the right, you have a dual SD card slot, which are both UHS 2 slots. We will explore its dual recording capabilities in a bit. The camera also comes with a strap that you can use to give yourself a bit more support when operating the camera handheld. There is also a 1/4 inch thread here, which we'll explain in a bit, and a time code in and out for syncing on multi-camera productions. On the back, you have a whole lot going on. The first thing to catch your eye will be the 3.5 inch 2.76 million dot back screen. I can't imagine vloggers using this camera, but if you did want to, you can fully articulate the screen, even with cables plugged into the I/O. Behind the flippy screen, you have the controls for the audio inputs. This isn't the easiest place to reach when you are running and gunning, but given how small the body is, I'm not sure where else you could put them. We will look at the audio properly in a bit though. You then have the battery slot and release button. The C70 uses the same battery as other modern cinema EOS cameras, which is the BPA series. When it comes to batteries, there are several awesome options on the market at the moment, such as the Hawkwoods BPA series, which are a good cost-effective option, or the Corswix Nano C98s, which is around the same price as a BPA 60 from Canon, but features a larger capacity and a DTAP output that could come in handy for some configurations. When we used the C70 to film the engineering video we spoke about earlier, we only switched the battery out once, and that was right towards the end of the shoot. We used a single Nano C98 for a good few hours of shooting, which is awesome, and lines up with Canon's official estimates. The layout of the back control is very reminiscent of the 1DX. Everything is fairly easy to reach without having to move your hand too much. You have 3 custom function buttons, a joystick, a dial for exposure and menu navigation, a menu button, and a cancel button. And lastly, the set button and dial. The feel of these dials is a bit inconsistent, and the joystick doesn't feel quite as nice as the one used on the screens on the C300 Mark III, although I think this may come down to the camera being a pre-production unit. Anyway, let's take a look at the technical specs of the camera. The sensor inside of the C70 is the same Super 35 sensor and Digic 7 processor combo that was used in the fantastic C300 Mark III, which was released earlier this year. The sensor has a physical size of 26.2mm by 13.8mm and a native ISO of 800 in C-Log 2 and 3. The maximum recording resolution you can record is DCI 4K. If you want to see how your lenses will behave with this sensor, head over to our camera coverage and lens tool via the link in the description. Canon are claiming that this sensor can capture 16 stops of dynamic range, and this is partly due to the implementation of the technique known as dual gain output. This isn't a new technique and is used by arguably the most popular digital cinematography sensor ever made, the Arri Alexa. The Arri Alexa sensor's dual gain architecture simultaneously provides two separate readout paths from each pixel with different amplifications. The first path contains the regular, highly amplified signal. The second path contains a signal with lower amplification to capture the information that is clipped in the first path. Both paths feed into the camera's AD converters, delivering a 14-bit image for each path. These images are then combined into a single 16-bit high dynamic range image. Canon hasn't gone into loads of detail about how they've implemented this technique, but they have stated that the sensor has a saturation prioritizing amplifier for bright areas and a noise prioritizing amplifier for darker areas, which results in a higher dynamic range and lower noise. However, one thing to be aware of is this dual gain output is only available when shooting at 60 frames per second and below. Canon has also said that the optimum setting for DGO is ISO 800 in Canon Log 2. As with other C-series cameras, the C70 also features an ND filter system. This new system is based on the previous C-series ND system but has been redesigned for the RF mount. You have a normal ND range of 0, 2, 4 and 6 stops and an extension mode which adds 8 and 10 stop modes. You can control this ND via the buttons on the side of the camera, which makes for easy access when you are running and gunning. We wanted to see what the quality of the NDs are like throughout the strength range. For this, we shot in our studio to control the light. We exposed with 10 stops of ND dialed in at f1.4, ISO 800, 180 degree shutter. We then closed down the lens 2 stops at a time with every 2 stops of ND until we hit 0, where we adjusted our shutter slightly, which may slightly affect the colour. The NDs hold colour really consistently across the full ND range, with almost no colour shift as you go through the range. So yeah, these NDs are pretty great and don't have too much shift at all. Having up to 10 stops of built-in ND is fantastic, and Canon have done a great job at getting this system into such a shallow mount. Fingers crossed when they update their larger C-series cameras next, they can use the same system with an RF mount. The camera also features the same dual pixel autofocus that is present in Canon's other Cinema EOS cameras, so that means the same fantastic feature set to the C200 Mark III, which includes touch AF, face detection, AF tuning, and dual pixel focus guide. Also, like the C300 Mark III, the C70 can use DAF while recording in 4K 120p, which is awesome. After using DAF V2 on the R5, the C70 AF still feels great, but I do wish they had included the newer version of DAF in this camera, as V2 is absolutely amazing. The C70 system only covers 80% of your image's horizontal and vertical range, which again is a little less than the 100% on the R5. However, the C70 is the first Cinema EOS camera to feature what Canon are calling EOS ITR AFX, which includes a head detection algorithm developed with deep learning technology. Basically, what it means is that in face detection mode, it should perform better than previous versions and even track the back of people's heads. It should also dramatically improve distance measuring and tracking reliability. We put it up against the C300 Mark III and it performs equally as well, if not a little bit better. With the touchscreen, you also have the ability to move your focus area around using the touchscreen and tap to focus like previous Cinema EOS cameras. The C70 also did a really good job at tracking the back of my head as we were walking through these tests, so the EOS ITR AFX clearly is doing something. The C70 features a range of different recording formats. You can shoot in either XF AVC or MP4 and then choose from a range of versions of those. As you expect from a camera in 2020, the camera features the ability to shoot 4K 42 10-bit in a range of formats. You can do 4K XF AVC all the way up to 30p and up to 60p using long op compression, and even 120 frames per second in the slow and quick mode. However, you can also shoot in a range of MP4 formats if you are wanting to get more out of your cards and hard drives, or if you don't require the larger data rates of the XF AVC formats. With this, you also have either H.264 or H.265 compression to choose from. H.264 is 4208-bit and H.265 is 4210-bit. H.265 still isn't very well supported in post, but it is handy to save on media storage. However, the files out of this camera are nowhere near as hard to handle as the ones out of the R5. We also shot our focus chart in each format to see how detail changes across them. As you expect, the all-eye version of XF-AVC will give you the best looking footage. The C70 features the ability to shoot either up to 120 frames per second in 4K or 180 in 2K, both in 4210-bit in either XAVC, H.264 long op or MP4 H.265 long op. It's a shame that there is no ability to shoot in an all-eye variant of this, but the long op footage still looks really good. In 4K 120, you don't have any crop, however in 2K 180 you will have a Super 16 crop. The C70 has seen the same improvement as the C300 Mark III, as you can now use full dual pixel autofocus when shooting in this slow motion mode. You can now also record audio at the same time as a separate file that will play back at your base frame rate. Overall, the slow-mo looks good and cuts fine with the regular formats. As the camera features a dual SD card slot, you have a range of different modes for utilising both slots. In the menu, you can choose between a few different modes. You have off, main and proxy, main and sub record, relay recording, and double slot recording. With off, the camera won't switch the cards automatically during a clip, and you'll be able to swap between cards using the media slot select button on the top of the camera. Main and proxy recording allows you to write one XF-AVC 4K 4210-bit file to one card, and then an XF-AVC proxy 4208-bit file to the second. This would be good for an online-offline editing workflow. Main and sub record allows you to select another format and resolution combo to record to the second card. Relay recording will simply allow you to keep rolling onto your second card once the first one is full. Double slot recording allows you to record your chosen format to both SD cards simultaneously if you want a backup of your rushes. And you can also record progressive UHD 59.94 to one card and interlace HD 59.94 to the other. It's great to have such a vast amount of options to choose from, and no matter what you wanted to do, you probably have the ability to record how you want to here. When it comes to what SD cards would work with the C70, V90 SD cards are recommended for the top XF-AVC modes. However, one thing that we noticed during our test was that the 64GB Angelbird V90 cards would cause crashes and slow writes when in 25p 4K XF-AVC all-eye. However, when using the exact same card but in 128GB version, we had no issues whatsoever. So at the moment, steer clear of 64GB cards. Canon haven't given us any recommended media as of yet, but as soon as they do, I'll make sure that the info and the links are in the description below. For now, if you want to pick up some media ready for the camera and play it safe, just grab some Angelbird or SanDisk V90 cards that are at least 128GB in size. Canon has also leaned into the vertical shooting trend, and this is why there is a 1/4" thread on the right hand side of the camera. With this, you can mount the camera easily for shooting this way, and you can also change the layout and orientation of the menu in the deeper menu system for vertical operation, so you're not struggling to read the settings while the camera is in this orientation. Though the menu doesn't flip here, just the home screen, which is a bit weird. Here you can choose between 0, 90 and 270 degrees. With the flip-out's touchscreen design, you can easily view and operate this, and you can even hit record on the touchscreen instead of using the record button, which will be in a weird place if you've got the camera set up in this way. As much of a joke vertical shooting has become, giving owners the added flexibility if they are asked for this kind of acquisition is nice. The benefit of shooting in this orientation over shooting a landscape and then cropping in post is for the extra resolution of using the full 4K image instead of losing resolution from cropping in afterwards. I think the market this camera is aimed at could end up shooting in this way at some point over the next few years, as vertical video becomes more sought after for smartphone content and digital signs, so this is a good feature to have. With the new RF mount comes an improved connection between the lens and the mount because of the increased bandwidth built into the mount. This means that in theory the IBIS should be better than the IBIS in the C300 Mark III because it's communicating with the lens more effectively. Canon is calling this combination IS. To test the IBIS, we filmed with it both on and off and simply filmed me walking back and forth. We used the RF 24-70 f2.8 for this test. The IBIS is software based and not a physical system, and does have a small crop when you're using it. When using the IBIS, it does a solid job, but you can see some weird movement every now and then. It would have been great if they'd featured the same stabilization tech that is present in the R5 here, instead of this digital IS. The C70 features a cooling system very similar to the existing Cinema's EOS cameras. This means that the air taken in via this air intake doesn't come into contact with any of the boards inside and is then exhausted out of the two outlets here and here. I like that you have the intake on the left side, as if you end up shoulder mounting the camera, it's better to have the exhaust not blasting out next to your face. However, during our time shooting with the camera, it really didn't get that hot, though in a hotter environment, I would be intrigued to see how it performs, as I know some Cinema EOS cameras can kick out some heat. They are cinema cameras after all. Having this cooling means that no matter how much you push the camera, the internals should stay cool, and you can expect the same reliability we've grown accustomed to with the Cinema EOS series. In the settings, you can change how the fan behaves, which is really nice to see. You can set the fan to either automatic or always on, depending on what you need. With always on, you can choose low, medium, or high, and with automatic, you can choose how the fan behaves in either standby or record. In standby, you can choose maximum also, whereas you can only go up to high in record mode. This may be good for people doing more narrative-based work with the camera. There are 5 custom picture profiles you can choose from. By default, you have C1 or BT709, C2, which is C-Log2, C3, which is C-Log3, C4, which is PQ, and C5, which is HLG. Past that, you have 15 user profiles you can set and define. You can go into each of these and edit a huge range of options. Once you've tweaked what you want to, you can then save your custom profile and even copy them to an SD card so you can transfer them between cameras if you need to. It's great to have such a large range of color modes in the C70. C-Log2 and C-Log3 are great, and I really like the 709 YDR profile too. For our shots with Angelo, we shot in Cinema Gamut C-Log2 and then used a LUT from Canon to get it to 709 YDR. Links for all the Canon scientific LUTs that we've got in the description below. When it comes to audio, you have a few options. C70 has an internal microphone at the front of the camera, 2 3-pin mini XLR ports with 48V phantom power, and a 3.5mm mic in. As we previously saw, you can control the gain and inputs of input 1 and 2. Inside the menu, you can see this visualized quite nicely. You can record 4 channels of audio. You have channel 1 and channel 2, and then channel 3 and channel 4 as separate selections. You have input terminals, which are what you're controlling behind the monitor, mic terminal, which is the 3.5mm mic input on the side, and then the built-in mic. This means that there are a huge range of combinations that you can do here, and you can also change what channels you can monitor and also choose which audio you want to output via the HDMI as well. As you expect from a Canon Cinema EOS camera, the audio when using the XLRs is great. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. We recorded Angelo's piece of camera that we showed earlier using a mini XLR to XLR cable and our trusty Sennheiser MKIII, and with a few tweaks in Premiere, it sounds great. The internal mics are also pretty decent. Not good for recording interview or piece of cameras, I would say really just for scratch audio, but they're really nice to have in case something goes wrong on set and you lose your sound. The C70 also features a pre-record mode. With this, you can select any of the XFAVC or MP4 formats. When you set this up, you get 3 seconds of footage cached, and as soon as you hit the record button, the camera will start the clip from 3 seconds before and continue to roll. 3 seconds for 4K isn't too bad, however I do wish we had at least 5 seconds here. The main shooting screen is very similar to previous Cinema EOS cameras. However, with the C70, Canon have decided to develop a new interface for the home main monitoring screen to use with touch control. All you have to do is tap the touch interface button in the bottom left and you can see a range of boxes appear. This means you can now touch on those areas to make changes. Top left brings up a range of shooting settings. Here you can swipe between 3 different pages. There are a range of key shooting settings that you may need to change on the fly or using touch here. This is designed well as the buttons are large and well laid out for touch control. You then have white balance, ND, aperture, ISO, which you can either slide through or register 3 presets that you can quickly switch between, shutter angle or speed, depending on what you've got it set to, and lastly, all your monitoring and exposure assists, which you can just toggle off and on here. In this last tab, you can toggle on a range of different monitoring assist tools and quickly toggle them on and off by simply tapping on what you want to change. This is a really nice and simple way of quickly changing all of these settings, and it's nice to see Canon implementing this kind of system. You can also turn an on-screen record button on in the menu, and this puts a box around the standby record indicator on the main screen that you can always use to toggle record on and off. You can actually have this on the screen while the touchscreen interface is completely turned off, so you'd only have the touch for the record button, which is nice. The C70 is the first Cinema EOS camera to feature auto ISO or gain function. This will behave similarly to other auto exposure functions from camcorders or stills cameras. Just make sure there is a lens attached, as you can't set this without one attached for some reason. When it comes to setting your exposure, you have 3 metering modes: standard, backlight, and spotlight. You also have auto exposure, shift, and response. Shift allows you to set your exposure compensation, and response allows you to set how fast the camera adjusts your exposure when in auto between low, medium, and high. This is great for applications where you are reacting to the light in front of you. So really anything in a documentary style where you need to be focusing on capturing what's happening in front of you without having to worry about controlling your exposure. You can't enable this in C-Log 2 or C-Log 3, but you can in every other mode. It won't be a feature everyone uses, but for some, this will be very handy. Making sure that you are properly exposed is crucial, so it's great to see a range of menu items to help you with it. First off the bat, you have the ability to change between shutter speed or angle and ISO or gain. You then also have a false color mode, which you can toggle on and off, and you even have a handy index built into the camera to understand where different parts of your image and exposure sit. You have zebras, which you can output on the LCD or HDMI or both. You can have 2 different zebra percentages on at the same time, and this is handy so as you can set 2 different values, one for your highlights and one for your skin tones. You then have a waveform or vector scope that you can change a few parameters of, so you can tailor it to exactly what you want. The only negative thing here is the inability to freely move this around the screen. They are fixed as to either left or right. As well as exposure assists, the camera also features a large range of monitoring assists. It features the ability to desqueeze anamorphic lenses in camera, which can either be output on the back LCD or the HDMI port. This won't record the squeeze, but it will note it in the metadata. Currently, you have the ability to desqueeze 1.3 and 2 times anamorphic lenses, but I do wish they had included 1.5 and 1.8 in there as well. You have a black and white mode, a very basic LUT mode where you have 3 options, a BT709 and 2 HDR assist LUTs, one for 1600% and one for 400%. You can assign this to a key so you can quickly toggle this on and off, which is nice. With DAF also comes focus guide, which works just as great as normal. Line up the triangles and boom, you've got focus confirmation. You of course have focus peaking, which you can output on both the LCD or out via the HDMI or both. And you also have 2 presets for peaking. This means you can set up 2 different amounts and then switch for different scenarios. You can then change gain, color, and frequency. The camera also features a magnification mode. This allows you to use 2 different levels of zoom even while you're recording. You can also move this around your frame using the joystick at the back. However, what is weird is this magnification mode doesn't work at all in slow and quick. There are a huge range of different marker options. For all of these, you can change the color of all of them. You have a center mark, which you can change between 4 different looking markers. Then there is a horizontal marker, vertical marker, and a grid layout marker. You also have a range of aspect ratio markers in a range of colors and styles. You then have a safe area marker, which you can customize again. And lastly, you have user customizable markers, which you can define the exact parameters of, which is handy. All of these marker options have the option to be output onto your HDMI, LCD, or both. The camera features 18 buttons and 13 of them are customizable. 12 of them are labeled, however the 13th isn't. The 13th is this one, labeled audio status behind the back of the LCD. When it comes to choosing what is bound to each button, you have a huge range of options to choose from here. You can also change what all of the dials on the camera do as well. This includes the control ring that is featured on RF lenses and EF to RF control ring adapter, which I like to assign to aperture personally. Canon can even declick these control rings so you can have a smooth focus throw instead of clicked. As well as that, you can also change a few parameters of RF lenses. Because these lenses are focused by wire, you can change which direction the focus ring turns depending on if you are used to one way or the other. You can toggle off or on the ability to have manual focus override and enable or disable focus override. As with previous Cinema EOS cameras, the C70 features an auto black balance feature. If you are unfamiliar with a black balance, this feature is only really available on these higher end video cameras, and it is basically calibrating the sensor for no light or true black. If your camera has a poor black balance, it will usually exhibit weird or incorrect colors in the darker areas of your image and just be noisier in the darker areas than normal. CMOS sensors don't need to be black balanced as much as older sensor types, but there isn't anything negative about getting into the habit of black balancing your camera often. Canon recommends running an ABB in a few different circumstances: when using the camera for the very first time or after a long period of not using it, after sudden or extreme changes in ambient temperature, after changing the sensor mode, after activating or deactivating slow and fast motion recording, including switching to another special recording mode, after changing the shooting frame rate when shooting slow and fast motion recording is activated, and after resetting the camera's settings. You can do this by making sure you either put the port cap on, or if you've got a lens on, put your lens cap on and close your lens down as much as possible, because you don't want any light hitting that sensor. Go into the menu and hit ABB. This process will take around a minute depending on the frame rate. When the confirmation message pops up, hit set and you're done. The C70 also features a My Menu system, which allows you to organize every single menu function into your own menu pages so you can quickly access your most used functions without having to delve and search in the full menu system. You can then also assign the My Menu tabs to any of the customizable physical buttons so you don't have to scroll through the menu to the My Menu tab. For our control tests with the C70, we shot it against the C200 and C300 Mark III. Let's start off taking a look at how the camera performs when it comes to underexposure. For the underexposure tests, we lit our chart using the false color built into the C70, so the third chip in from the right is our middle gray, and this sat dead on green and my skin was around one stop over that. We shot with our Otus 55mm across all three cameras and shot in XFAVC all-eye 4K 25p with the C70, and then Cinema Raw Light on the C200 and C300 Mark III. So the C300 Mark III will show what the C70 sensor can really do without being limited by its format. For underexposure, we lit for f2 and then closed down the lens a stop at a time until we hit 6 stops under. The C70 does a really good job at holding color down to -4 stops. However, at -5 stops, stuff gets very noisy, but color accuracy is still good all the way down to around -6. With the C300 shooting raw, color information is held slightly better, but is a tad noisier. The difference between these two cameras and the C200 here is actually quite dramatic. From 2 stops under, the C200 is significantly noisier than the other two cameras, and from 3 stops, the image is incredibly noisy. Color is also considerably better on the C70 and C300 Mark III throughout the range when compared to the C200. For our overexposure test, we pushed the cameras to go 6 stops overexposed. We lit for f16 and then opened up the lens a stop at a time until we hit 6 stops over. Each camera handled 1 stop, 2 stops, and 3 stops really well. At 4 stops, you can see my skin starting to break on each camera. However, across each camera, you can see color is still held really well in the chart. At +5, stuff starts getting a little funky across the board. I would say that the C300 Mark III handles this the best, then the C70, and then the C200. At 6 stops over, all 3 cameras are pretty much gone. This is good performance overall, not super high-end performance, but the C70 doesn't have a super high-end price tag. With the C70 sensor featuring Canon's DGO tech, we wanted to shoot some tests to see how this affected the performance of the sensor when you had it on and off. For this, we used the same methodology as previously mentioned, but we switched between 4K 25p XFAVC all-eye, which has DGO enabled, and 4K 100p XFAVC long op, which has DGO disabled. Looking at overexposure first, performance seems to be the same. You have good chart performance up to +4 stops, but past that point, colors start getting a bit funky. However, when looking at underexposure, you can see quite a large difference. From around 3 stops under, you can see a large difference in noise between the 2 different modes. With DGO on, the image is overall much cleaner than with it off. Color is also held better with DGO on past 3 stops under point. So shooting with DGO does make a difference in overall usable dynamic range, and these extra stops come in the shadows. With our ISO test, we lit for T2 ISO 800 and then closed down our lens as we step up the ISO range. Looking at the C70, up to 3200 ISO is very clean, and at 6400 it starts getting a little bit noisy, but I would say up to 12800 is usable. At 25600 up, I would say it starts getting unusable, although color holds pretty well and so does detail. Performance of the C300 Mark III is pretty similar, and the C200 performs a little bit worse when compared from 3200 onwards. The C70 does suffer from some aliasing, which you can see on our chart here. I haven't measured the exact rolling shutter performance in the C70, but you can see some jello effect as you are panning, but it's not the worst I've ever seen, and it's completely usable unless you're doing very fast whip pans. In conclusion, the Canon C70 is a very well-featured camera housing a fantastic sensor. Canon's new entry point into the Cinema EOS line has the flexibility of RF mount, the same fantastic sensor as the C300 Mark III, a solid range of 42 10-bit recording formats, Canon's stellar dual pixel autofocus system, and all in a smaller body which is going to be easier to manage than its larger brothers for smaller productions. If you're looking for an entry point into a dedicated interchangeable lens video camera, this is a very solid option in the current market. I can see this camera being very popular across a range of different productions and markets, and its price tag could even give some of the higher end mirrorless cameras a run for their money. Let us know what you think of the Canon C70 in the comments below, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.